Hi, everybody, and welcome. I have a very special guest today. I have Jonas Sanderson. Jonah is the Jewish Chaplain. He's right now in Gastonia, North Carolina, as a chaplain for the hospital system there. He has a BS in criminal justice. I hope it's not a real BS, I'm joking. And an MA in Jewish studies. He's the co-founder of Back Engage Now, a Jewish side prevention organization that's reached 2,000 people in 3 years. And right here on our podcast, we are about to triple that just with you. He's an advocate for outreach, for food, for connection. It's a pleasure to have you, Jonah. Welcome. And today, I'd love to talk about mental health because I think it's something that's really on the forefront of our minds. But I want to start first with your story. Give us your background. Tell us your story.
So, hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure, Rabbi Bernath. I was born the son of two incredible Jewish parents. Growing up, we were conservative. We lived in Los Angeles, where my parents still reside to today. I have one sister who's really amazing. She's a psychoanalyst in New York. And I grew up going to conservative synagogue, which was really fun. I didn't have the day school or camp experience because I was more involved with secular and other kinds of life experiences. And at about 22, after a life-altering experience, and I was a high school dropout because I couldn't pass a math exam at 17 in the state of California.
Wow.
And Chabad Lubavitch found me quite literally through the Chabad of Oxnard, which is right on the beach in Oxnard, California, near Santa Barbara. And the rabbi there, the shliach, said, "What are you doing? And maybe you should go to yeshiva."
Rabbi Dov Mushnick, good friend of mine.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
I owe a lot to him. And so I actually went to yeshiva in Israel at Esha Torah for 2 years in Jerusalem because of Rabbi Mushnick.
Wow. And you went to yeshiva, you dropped out of high school. What was that like, being someone who I would say wasn't accepted? And I guess I'm assuming that this rabbi kind of took you in and said, "You're okay."
Well, yes. And I mean, I wasn't accepted because I wasn't an advocate for myself. I think a lot of mental illness comes from not understanding how to be the best self-advocates that we can be.
Right.
We're very good at advocating for causes. We're very good at advocating for PETA or for fairer wages or a boatload of issues that are really important. But the Torah so beautifully says in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, that if you're not starting with you, you're not starting the right way.
So if you were to go back at that moment, and I love the fact that we're kind of analyzing your story as we're telling it. I really like that concept. That I have no idea. I mean, I had no plan for this here, so I like that we're doing this. If you were to go back and someone that was going through a similar situation, such as you, not making it through school, it's such a common story, especially today, not being successful, not feeling like you can make it. What would you say to that young person about advocating for yourself?
I would say, I would change that. I would ask, what would I say to the younger version of myself at 17? And I would say, that there is nobody on your team that can do the best work if you're not doing it for yourself. And, teenagers were rebellious. I was rebellious. I could have stayed in high school. I was having a harder time, but I chose to give up easily.
Right.
And that was more about fighting an inner mental illness battle within myself, which was, the lack of self-confidence. So I would tell younger people that, we can go to as much therapy as we want to go to. We can go to as many mentors as we can, but until we find the strength within us to work on ourselves, we won't have benefit from any of that.
Yes. So what would that look like if you could speak to that younger version of yourself, what would you actually do? I mean, I know you've said a lot in that, and I love to unpack that, but we'll do that soon. What would you actually physically do? Would you go back to the school and say, there's got to be a way for me to stay here, this doesn't make sense? Like, what physical elements would you do to make that happen for yourself?
Sure. I believe very strongly in homeschooling. And when I went back to high school at 26, I homeschooled myself. So I would have homeschooled myself. I would have been able, most likely, to have been an advocate for my parents to have said, this isn't working. I feel I can get much more of, out of a high school experience if I homeschooled myself, because I didn't have a lack of friends. I was always a very popular and warm person, outgoing. And so it wasn't that I was lacking in friends and relationships. It was that I was lacking in the self-confidence to actually get the best education. And in Los Angeles, when I was growing up, there was a lot of the education for people that have learning differences was very sparse and lacking. And we found a lot more of it that was beneficial online.
So you're fairly young here. What are your parents saying about this? I'm assuming they had something to say at that time.
Sure. I think my parents were just trying to get their head above water to raise two kids. I mean, when I fell in love with Yiddishkite, I fell in love with, Orthodox Judaism because of the big families. However, having one kid is going to take over your life. Having 6 kids, I don't even know how people can survive it.
Right.
So they were looking and saying, let's just deal with this one step at a time. I think that they didn't also know how to be advocates in a system that wasn't working either. We're much more advocating now as millennials and as Gen Zers than we were and than our parents were, because they didn't know how to change a system. They just knew how to be cogs within it.
Right. I want to unpack this a second. Advocating. I don't know what that word means. Can you explain what that word is? Advocate.
Sure. If there's something within a system that you're within and it's not working, you have to be the one to say, you know what, this isn't working for me, right? The way that I'm given this math test or the way that I'm given this driver's test to get my permit is not working. Can we do it through language instead of through a video, or a video instead of through written work, right? And for math, the truth of the matter is, many people today, and you and I discussed this when we first met on the phone, was I believe that the reason that I struggled with math was because, and I had a 3rd grade math level for many years as an adult, was because people tried to throw at me algebra and trigonometry and geometry. And the truth of the matter is, what you should know as a child to an adult is how to tip and how to balance a checkbook and the basics. If you don't know the basics, then nothing else matters, because you can't function. So we spent so much time, and I spent so much time being given the advancements of what we were learning or were supposed to learn without the basics, that it was overwhelming.
And feeling like a failure at it.
And feeling like a failure when you couldn't even master that.
That's right. When obviously you have a different talent and you have a different purpose and direction, and you were able to somehow find meaning in your life outside of the math that you were failing at, if I could say that.
In every way, because math doesn't make the man or woman.
Contrary to popular belief. So fast forward, you go to yeshiva. What's that like?
So I grew up in a very, very Zionist and Israeli-based household. My father was the head of the Los Angeles Jewish Federation. He made Jewish television and film for 30 years prior to that. And we didn't have Shabbat, but we had real religion based around family reunions. And we had Passover, and we had all of the holidays. But I really
a really beautiful, strong Jewish culture, a feeling you were a proud Jew growing up. I just want to get a feel for how your parents raised you.
Oh, very proud to be Jewish, proud to be a Zionist. My father actually was on a Jewish agency trip to Israel when he was 14, and he went to Prime Minister Ben Gurion's house with these kids on the trip, and he was the youngest. And as everybody was leaving, David Ben Gurion tapped my father on the shoulder and said, "Watch out for my country." And
he
so he
felt that sense of mission towards Israel. Beautiful.
That was the home that I grew up in. And when I went to, so I fast forward, I met Rabbi Dov Muchnick, and then I met one of my closest friends, Rabbi Yitz Jacobs from Los Angeles, Torah in Los Angeles. And he said, you know, there's no better way to experience Torah and Yiddishkite than to go to Israel. And I went to Israel, and I actually became, because I couldn't sit and learn, because that's not the style for me, I actually became a fundraiser for Aish International. And I traveled the country for 2 years, fundraising tens of thousands of dollars to get the yeshiva boys to go and stay and learn Torah. And my father grew up as a chef, and I grew up in his house eating really good food. So I would knock on doors of random strangers in Israel and ask them if I could make Shabbos for them and buy all their food and cook in their kitchen. And they not only let me, but that's how I made friends for those 2 years.
That's great. And that's something that you could do in Israel. And I think in the rest of the world, that sounds insane, but there is that sense, especially in Jerusalem, there is that sense of family and that sense of community. And it wouldn't be strange for some American boy to knock on your door and say, hey, let's do this. Or fine, maybe you won't be able to do it, but you can come for Shabbos. And that's a very beautiful thing. I love that.
Yeah.
So you did that. And then what happens afterwards?
So I came back from Israel. I was 25, and I really had the inkering to become a rabbi. And I really loved what I saw Rabbi Muchnick do, what I saw Rabbi Jacobs do. And I said, you know, this is really quite simple. I just have to do this. And there has to be a way for me to do this.
Are you sure? I mean, what kind of job is a rabbi for a good Jewish boy?
It's a really good job. My parents were like, Jonah, you're going to be beholden to the community. You're not going to make any money. We're going to have to support you. And so the first thing that I did at 26 was I went back to high school. And I found a program online.
At 26 years old, you went back to high school.
I went back to high school. So it's the story of Rabbi Akiva and the Talmud, who at 40 learned the Aleph base.
It's an amazing, you know, we say that story about Rabbi Akiva and we kind of say it tongue in cheek to a bit, but it's an amazing thing. And you got to eat a lot of pride.
You have to eat a lot of pride. You have to sit there. You have to learn. You have to learn how to write an essay. I didn't have any idea what a paragraph was. I had no idea, you know, how to add on a calculator. I had no educational experience.
But very street smart. You're knocking on doors, so you're very street smart.
So the truth of the matter is, I think that life is a combination of street smarts and academic smarts. And I call myself a George W. Bush Republican, because the truth of the matter is, the Torah very basically says in Maimonides' words that the derech hayashar, the middle of the path, is the best path for people to be on. So what we're seeing now, and what we've seen since the Trump presidency, and really the Obama years as well, was the extremes on both the left and the right. And when you go to an extreme, you hurt yourself as an individual.
And probably some other people in the process.
And other people in the process, because we're not meant to be extremists. We're meant to live in the gray. And that's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to live in the gray, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. But if we're meant to do anything in this world as children of God, we're meant to be uncomfortable and make meaning out of that uncomfort.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I always think about emotional intelligence and how important it is in our day and age. And someone once told me, and don't remember who it was. Someone told me that emotional intelligence is the ability to hold two truths at the same time.
Yes.
And those can be opposing truths. And it seems to be a lot of your life is you're constantly kind of finding that middle path by holding various opposing truths at the same time. That's what it sounds like to me.
In every way. And it's the Rabbi Simcha Banema Peshiska. It's the two pieces of paper in your pocket.
That's right.
The world was created for me, and I am but dust and ashes.
That's right.
And so I went back to high school, and then I said, what I need, because I need a bachelor's degree to make it in this world. I need to be successful. I need to, people with bachelor's degrees make, more money than people without. And at the same time, I also understood that, I could have run a very successful entrepreneurial business without a college degree. And that was something that I thought about. But, as a rabbi, you do need that extra oomph to get you across the door and the threshold. So I went and I enrolled in a college for criminal justice. Wow. And I started to do that because I was a big fan of Law and Order Sexual Victims Unit, just loved the show. And I learned all about, the process of trial and error and criminal justice and the prison reform, victims, perpetrators through that show. And so I said, let me do this. My parents were pushing and they said, great, Jonah, you should do this. If this is what you want to do, we'll support you. And so I went to college, got this degree, and became very heavily involved in advocating for perpetrators of criminal acts for sex. And I think that's so important to talk about these things within community, especially with mental illness being so prevalent and the Me Too movement being so at the forefront of our minds. And many people look at victims and they spend their time with them, but we're going to have less victims if we have less perpetrators. Yeah. And so the Chabad movement does something really amazing, which is the Aleph Initiative. And they go into prisons and they provide kosher food, and they provide outreach and advocacy for early release and parole. And so I spent about 4 years really doing that, as well as graduating and then entering a master's degree program.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you ended up taking this master's in Jewish studies.
So I have a master's in Jewish studies through a seminary in Los Angeles that is adjacent to the UCLA campus. And we sat and we learned from real hachamim, real sages that were great at teaching. And I walked out with this degree and this knowledge, and I said, I want to create something based off of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and his Torah. How can I create something like that? And I did. Wow.
That's really amazing. So let's talk about mental health. Obviously you're now a hospital chaplain, but how does mental health play into your role now? How long have you been in the hospital?
So I've been in the hospital for about 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a year pastoral internship. And I think mental health plays a role into everything that we do, because if we're not looking at the core of why we get up in the morning and what we're really wanting to strive for, and the truth of the matter is, and I'm not the first one to say this, we're not meant to be happy on this earth. Happiness is not the goal. It shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be twofold. It should be equanimity and not being stagnant. And so I look at my favorite biblical character really is Jacob, because Jacob had his ladder. And the truth of the matter is, so the angels were going up and they were going down. And, many people look and have said, well, why is down a good thing? And the truth of the matter is, the Jews had to go down in Egypt to the 49th level of impurity so they can go up, right? So they can be released into God's domain of freedom. And where you don't want to be on that ladder is stagnant.
Right.
So I believe that stagnancy creates mental illness, and I've seen that because stagnant people use drugs. Stagnant people are addicted to sex and pornography. Stagnant people have bad marriages, go through midlife crises, all of that.
Well, I want to back up a second. I have two questions based on what you just said. I want to talk about the thing that you don't believe in happiness in a second. But before that, I want to define what is mental health. I mean, I know right now, as a result of the pandemic, there's a tremendous amount of loneliness, and there's a tremendous amount of, we have to be so connected with people, because even people who are equally balanced, or we call them regular people, they're going through a hard time now. And so that empathy, because we've all gone through it together, so I think we have a shared empathy. That is such a powerful and such an important thing, and it's the call of the hour, in my opinion. But how would you define mental health and what that means?
So mental health is an adjective and a noun. The noun of it is that mental health is just as important as your physical health, and mental health has to do with how you act in the world, how you feel when you get up,
Right.
and what you do with your daily life. And the adjective of it is how would you describe your mental health when you're in certain situations, right? How would you go from getting up in the morning, going to a job that you don't like, going home and going to sleep? That there's a level of depression that you develop in that. And I'll take it back
with that repetition, doing something that you don't like, doing something just to be able to support your family.
Right. And many people have said that there are three groups of very depressed and suicidal people that have come about in the last 10 years, really in the last, I would say since 2018 was one of the last studies done on suicide. And they are children ages 10 to 15, young adults ages 18 to 35, and older adults and seniors 35 to, let's say, up to 90. And the biggest group is, and the group that is the most suicidal with the most deaths per year, is the young professionals, young adults, 18 to 35. The group that's fast trailing them is children ages 10 to 15. And then the group that is least likely to take their own life is the seniors and older adults. Now, that's not because they're not they're not depressed. It's because they've lived through enough of the Great Depressions, of the wars, to know that they're going to get up tomorrow, that the sun rises again, and that they have some autonomy in this. And children don't understand that, because children are bombarded with too much social media, too much information, and they are very, very attuned and aware now more than ever of what's around them. And it's not always good, right? When the show 13 Reasons Why on Netflix came out with Selena Gomez, USC, the Keck School of Medicine, reported a very steady increase in both suicidal attempts from children ages 14 and 10, and they also reported phone calls coming in from children. And one of the reasons that happened was because children were allowed to see a suicide take place in a bathtub, right? So normally you would never have seen it, and you would just go to a funeral. But now you're looking at something and you're saying, oh, if she can do this, slit her wrists, bleed out in a bathtub, then I can do this too if I'm really depressed and I don't have anybody to talk to, right? But the calls were the most important thing. The calls from these kids saying, help me.
And how many calls they weren't getting, right? How many people don't know where to call and don't know where to turn, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think this is also, must be taken with a set of privilege. I mean, years ago, talking about 100 years ago, people didn't have time to think about their mental health. They were just busy, just kind of being.
Doing.
50 years ago, probably something similar. Something changed, and I think it's a new change, and that is that sense of purpose and that sense of meaning that seemed to be like there was a trajectory. You went through school, you got married, you had a family. They did the same darn thing over again, and this was the trajectory of life. Where today we have the emergence of the young professional. We have people who are leaving university or leaving school, and they're not settling down, so to speak. I hate that term, but they're not settling down right away. And so that's one element. The other element is that there is access, right? Kids years ago would have never been able to see a suicide. And today they can. And we know from studies that it's very hard for the subconscious to differentiate between what we see on TV and what we see in real life. So a lot of kids are having a hard time differentiating that. So it's like they saw it in real life. And that's having a tremendous effect on kids.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, it doesn't even have to go to the extreme of suicide. You can take it to pornography, right? So years ago, you would get a Playboy magazine at a newsstand, and that's what you would see: airbrushed women looking like they look. Now you can go on Pornhub and all
absolutely,
you rape fantasies, and you can see gang rapes and all of these things. And when you're 10 and 14 and you're looking at that, you not only do you think, or do you not understand how to see that this is not real, right? Your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. Your frontal cortex isn't fully functioning until that age. So you're taking all this information in, but you're really not taking it in. And you're not talking to somebody about it. You're just taking it in, and maybe you're talking to your friend about it, but your friend's looking at the same thing you're looking at.
Right. Yeah, that's scary. And there's also this shame that is associated with it. People feeling like they're alone. There's no one else out there that has the same struggle as me. Whatever I'm going through, I'm doing it alone because nobody can understand me. Nobody can understand my struggle. No one is experiencing the same thing as me. And also, okay, even if I wanted help, even if I knew that I had a problem, where do I go for help? There's all these really practical, really difficult questions where, and it's across the board when it comes to addiction, when it comes to mental health. People really don't know where to go and how to even get started. And you have to also first come to the realization that it is an issue, and that it's not an issue that you are dealing with alone. It's an issue that people are dealing with. It's a universal issue that a lot of people are dealing with. Whatever that particular mental health issue is that you're going through, it's an issue and people are dealing with it. So that acknowledgement, the Rambam says that the knowledge of the issue is half the remedy. The knowledge of the disease is half the remedy. It's a very powerful thing because so many people have an issue, and I'm using that such a broad term because they have a challenge. I don't like the word issue. They have a challenge, but they don't realize that that's a challenge. And if they do realize it's a challenge, they don't realize that there's so many other people that they know that are going through the same thing. Just no one's talking about it. So it's a challenge that's born with shame.
Nobody's talking about it, and when they do talk about it, they're not asking the right questions, right? One of the most common mistakes that we make in talking about suicide is to say that if you mention suicide to a child, they'll do it, right? They'll think about it, they want to do it. The truth of the matter is that's not true. Many studies, including the recent studies from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, World Health Organization, National Suicide Association Hotline, Prevention Hotline, they will tell you that if you talk about it, if you ask the child, do you have a plan, have means, they'll talk about it and they won't do it. And we cannot prevent, just like we can't prevent intermarriage, we should stop trying to prevent intermarriage. It's going to happen. We cannot prevent suicide. We can stop one by one, and maybe then we'll be in a more preventable way doing something. But if we just paint a broad brush over everything and say we're going to prevent all suicide, all intermarriage, we're actually leading to more of it because we're not understanding.
It's so interesting that you say that because I'm sorry to cut you off. It's interesting to say because I say that so often is that for so long, the conversation in the Jewish community has been about intermarriage, where today we have a much broader conversation that's not happening. And that is the conversation of marriage. Young people are not getting married. A lot of them coming from divorced homes, a lot of them coming from not knowing how to get married, not being able to find the right person. So I think that we have to shift that discussion from intermarriage to marriage. And I think you're saying the same thing about mental health. We have to shift that discussion and go to the root of the cause head on and not be scared. to ask the difficult questions.
Right. We have 14 million Jews in this world, however you count who a Jew is.
You just
right?
need one.
We just need one to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And only are people not getting married today, what they're not even engaging in the pleasure of dating.
That's right.
Right. And so what happens is, for the argument for people to intermarry, I have a very good friend who's a Jewish educator living in Los Angeles, was married, had 2 kids with her husband, also Jewish, and then she divorced him because of his narcissism, and now she's been very happily with somebody who wasn't Jewish. Now, I support that. One, because I can't tell you who to marry, just like I can't tell you who to see as a therapist. I can tell you that if you marry a Jew and you go to a rabbi and you take classes and you have a psychologist you talk to and you come from a good Jewish home and all the building blocks that should be there are there, then maybe you could talk about having a successful Jewish marriage. However, if I can't tell you that you're doing the wrong thing by marrying out. What we need to do, in the same way we're talking about suicide prevention, is we need to say, okay, you did this thing, right? Now, how can we bring you in step by step by step, even if it's differently, even if we can't do it all the way? How can I help you, right?
There is a bit of a difference. I'm sorry to cut you off, but there is a bit of a difference between intermarriage and suicide prevention. And I want to leave the intermarriage discussion for maybe a different time. I will say this about intermarriage. I believe that there are 2 types of people in your life that you can marry: someone who's going to challenge you and someone who's going to say, yes, dear. And a lot of people choose the easy route. Nobody said life was going to be easy. No one is. I would rather to choose someone in my life who's going to challenge me, help me grow, and make me a better person. That is called in the Torah an ezer kenegdo.
Yes,
Adam and Eve. Ezer kenegdo is literally someone that's with me against me, right? Ezer is against me, kenegdo with me. Like it's literally it's an oxymoron, ezer kenegdo. Yeah. Or I guess because it's 2 words would be a paradox.
But by the way, let me just say, and then we'll go on. You can ask me whatever you want to ask me.
Yeah.
I believe so strongly that you're right. But today, it's not that we're not having those conversations with our kids and our parents didn't have them with us. They did. It was the guilt association to intermarry.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. It's not Hanukkah guilt, it's Hanukkah guilt. All the guilt
is gone now.
Yes.
And that guilt will if you told a secular Jewish person that was going to intermarry, not to intermarry, and you gave them your spiel you just gave me, they not only would walk away, they would walk away angry at you.
Absolutely.
There's a privilege that you're having that they're not understanding.
Well, what you're saying is wrong. Yeah, what you're saying is the past is not a good enough reason to, and you know it's a very strong question today. I always say that when given the opportunity, people vote with their feet. And today we live in a time of privilege and Jews are voting with their feet. And we have to ask the question as people within the Jewish community, why? Why are people voting with their feet? And that's a much broader question that we'll get to, and we'll leave that as a question for now. Let's go back to mental health and suicide prevention. What do you, and there is this conversation, and I love this conversation, just the fact that we're able to say the thing, we're able to say it out loud, and we're able to take it head on. What would you say for parents who are dealing with a particular issue with their child, and they notice that? And some of them are scared. They're scared to say the thing. Maybe they're scared because they don't know how to answer it. Maybe they're scared because they don't want to go down that road with their child. But a lot of parents, I think, if they were to look at, maybe if they have a child who's suffering with mental health issues or challenges, they probably noticed it before. They just maybe didn't want to accept it. So what would you say to that parent?
I would say that you're not alone, and that the route out and the best way forward now is just to deal with the child right in front of you. Rabbi Shais Taub, I'm sure a friend of yours, has said that we have to look at the whole child holistically.
Right.
And we can't treat thing by thing by thing by thing by thing For a child in crisis, especially a child in suicidal crisis, we have to treat the whole child, right? So whether that's a feeling of guilt that led to, because there are two types of suicide. Let's go with that for a second. There are two types of suicidality. The first type of suicidality is the Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade suicidality, which was something happened to them. A girlfriend broke up with Anthony Bourdain. Kate Spade's husband left her, and there was a snap decision to end their lives, and they did. The other type of suicidality, the more common one, is something has been building up in you for years, for months, and you become clinically and chronically depressed, and there is no way out but to kill yourself. You don't want to kill yourself. You fight it with everything you have, but that's the only way you see out, right? And so children have this need to be expressive, and I would tell parents that the need to be expressive should be taken off of social media, right? I would tell the parents that the best way to help your kids is to limit their interactions with iPhones, with television, with social media, and get them outside, get them helping you in the kitchen, get them going on walks, get them being with friends, having real conversations. Even if those conversations are ridiculous nonsense, get them talking, right? The more that children play those video games where they're where they're alone, but across the street is the other person, the more detrimental to their health that is. And in another way, the more that they're shut-ins in their own homes, especially because of COVID, the more they're shut-ins in their own homes, and even if they're just going for a walk by themselves, then you take your kid out for a walk at night, have dinner together, turn off phones, have Shabbos on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, have a half an hour where you do nothing but sit and talk, or sit in silence without technology and watch it change for them.
Yeah, what a great idea of disconnecting. I mean, it's who would have imagined that when the Torah writes about Shabbat, that 3,500 years later, there would be this conversation about Day of Disconnect.
Right. And I don't
and
care
it's
how
so
many,
much more important today for us because we need that time to disconnect.
right. And I don't care how people do Shabbat. I don't care if they light candles and go out and have a pepperoni pizza. Do something. It will lead to more, right? I think many times people look and say, if I don't do everything, I'm not going to do anything, right? What good is one thing if it doesn't lead to all of it? And the Lubavitcher Rebbe had a great saying, which was just do one mitzvah at a time.
Right.
Don't take on something that you're going to give up because you've taken on too much. Mental illness is also looked at that way. Just do one thing at a time to better yourself, to make your mental health more in a positive light. Don't do something and add on 10 more things thinking that if you don't, you take away 9, you should take away all 10.
I love that. It's not a zero-sum game. Small steps. Steps. That is a very good idea. So small step can even just start with, right now you're watching this. Well, why don't you just, or you're listening to this, why don't you put an earphone in and go for a walk while you're watching it? Because that fresh air, especially in us colder climate areas, it's starting to get much nicer out. It's that ability to just be out, and that alone will help. And I think that it's also important to know that certain people are prone. So those kids who are sitting in front of those games, gaming, they're prone to it. So we have to be a little more careful with them, and we have to, gently encourage them. Let's go out. Let's go do something. It's a really great.
Ask them what they want to do, right?
Exactly. On their terms.
Connect. There is no greater bond than a father to a son and a mother to a daughter. There is no greater bond than that. And unfortunately, because of the digital age and because we're living in a different climate right now, those bonds have not been kept up.
Right.
And I believe that we need to go back to bare basics and keep up those bonds and recreate them. Yeah.
It's such a good message. This has been great. This is great. Before we conclude, I'd love to know what's something that you're doing that could really help others and help others be able to succeed in this realm of mental health.
So one of the things, I love to, can we give away a secret of what we were talking about on our phone meeting yesterday for this podcast?
You can say whatever you want. I may or may not shake my head in agreement.
So I would say to your audience, you said you have 12,000 to 15,000 listeners per episode. So one of the things that we want to do, Rabbi Bernath and I, is to create mental health awareness Shabbat dinners in his community, for singles and for young professionals, for children with parents. And we're going to get that funded and we're going to get that started. And hopefully we're going to do it in Elul time, but right before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in September, October of 22.
And if somebody wants to do a young adult mental health Shabbat dinner, what does that look like? Is in your eyes?
So what we're going to do, and we're going to have to hammer it out, you and I. But one of the ideas that I had that we developed in Los Angeles through Back Engage Now was we brought 10 singles to a Shabbos table that were ages 20 to 30, and we sat them down. We had food prepared by or a catered kosher restaurant or by the rabbi and rebbetzin of the Chabad or the synagogue. And we had a professional at the table as a therapist. And we curated conversations, and the singles met each other, made friends, and the therapist got a potential client or two. And we're going to be doing that. And that's what we can do. And we don't have to do big events. We can do very small events, because the smaller, the better, actually. And what we want to see happen, what I like to see happen in the Montreal community, is you do one thing that does another thing that starts another chain of events. And it's a positive chain, so that we can actually grow community and we can have less suicide in the world.
It's an amazing wish and an amazing dream. I also know, on a separate note, that Jonah, you are an eligible bachelor.
I don't know if we should say that on this podcast. Maybe there are people that I don't want to be. Yes, I am a bachelor. Yes.
Well, there's nothing like the present, and maybe someone's listening. Tell us about yourself, and maybe someone will have an idea they can send me of a nice Jewish girl for you.
Okay, so I am 33. I'm a modern Orthodox Jew. And I am studying for smicha, for rabbinic ordination. I'd like to work in outreach and make community with somebody, and to work in mental illness. And I'm looking for a very lovely young woman, ages 27 to 34, no children, not married, who is vaccinated. That's a must for me. And who is wanting to be the wife of somebody doing outreach.
I love, I always ask this question because I think that so many people are clear or not so clear about what they're looking for, but not as clear about who they are and what they bring to the table. So who are you, and what do you bring to the table for a potential suitor?
So I'm a very outgoing person. I am a very independent person. I've taken care of myself for, many years. I'm a Jewish man who loves community and friends. And I'm somebody that is very dogged and persistent in the most positive way. I am what I would call a positive communal disruptor. And I really think that I can offer somebody just that, a great life, a life of Torah and mitzvahs, and doing the work of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, and bringing people together in a real precise and consensed way to make the world a better place.
And are you open to relocation? There's a lot of people from a lot of different places here.
I am. Yeah, I'm open to relocation.
So if she has a job that is specific to a particular location, you're okay to move there?
I am. I would move there, and I would make community where we are.
And so just while we're on this, what are 3 things you can't live with and 3 things you can't live without? By the way, we did not prepare this. This is really on the spot.
This is so funny, because when I counsel people, I ask them, what are 5 things you're looking for and that you must have in a spouse?
Okay.
And so 3 things that I can live without, 3 things that I can't. I cannot live without the most amazing and delectable food. I cannot live without Torah study, and I cannot live without connection to other people. I can live without divisiveness. I can live without communal harm, and I can live without extreme views.
Okay, so you like living somewhere in the middle.
Yes, I'm a centrist through and through. We gotta go back to George W. Bush and tell him to run again in 2024.
if he's not finished painting, he's enjoying his painting.
And have him paint me something. I want him to paint me a picture of the Bible.
I'll never forget the day before he left office. He had an interview, and the last question of the interview was, "So what are you going to do now?" And there he's like, "I'm going to go to my ranch and I'm going to paint, and no one's going to see me." And that's what he did. That's what he did.
Love it. I show you before I let you go. I should show you my Chabad artwork that I have. I'm very, very proud of it. So let me show you. I'm going to take you into my living room for a second, and I'm gonna show you. Let's see. I
actually saw there on your wall behind you this really nice piece of Muchnik art, of Michal Muchnik's art. Oh wow, yes, I know this. Oh, beautiful piece of art.
And then this.
Wow. Yes. And I saw behind you during the interview there was this very beautiful piece of Muchnik art. So with the
it's not his art.
Abraham's tent open on all four sides. Yeah, that's his father's art. That's Rabbi Muchnik's father's art.
So no, I did not get it from him though. This is not, somebody else did this.
Oh really? Let me see it. No, that was done by Rabbi Muchnik's father.
Wow, I actually did not think that. You know what? The truth of the matter was, and I really have a reason to. You're seeing my whole entire home.
Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah.
I have a reason to keep this and really love it now more because of that. But my sister got it for me for Hanukkah, and she didn't tell me where she got it. And she's not an observant Jew in the way that I am, so I don't think she knows who he is.
Yeah. So that's his work. That's his work. It's very
Rabbi, this is so amazing. Thank you for this.
This has been really special. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. And I'm looking forward to more. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too, Rabbi Zygazun.